boy who remembered numbers in a small two-room apartment in Chennai, India, a boy named Sundar lived with his family. His father, Raghunatha, was an electrical engineer, and his mother, Lakshmi, was a stenographer. They didn't have much, but they had dreams. Sundar shared a room with his younger brother, and they often slept on the floor. Life was simple, but filled with love and hope. From an early age, Sundar showed an extraordinary ability to remember numbers. He could recall every phone number he had ever dialed on their rotary phone. His parents noticed this talent and encouraged him to pursue his education diligently. They believed that knowledge was the key to a better life. Sundar attended Jawahar Vidyalaya Senior Secondary School in Chennai, and later completed his class 12 from Vanavani School at IIT Madras. He was a diligent student, known for his exceptional memory and keen interest in academics. His passion for technology and innovation became evident early on. He was fascinated by electronic gadgets and often tinkered with them, trying to understand their inner workings. After completing his schooling, Sundar enrolled at the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT, Kharagpur, one of India's most prestigious engineering institutions. He chose to study metallurgical engineering, a field that combines materials science and engineering. During his time at IIT Kharagpur, Sundar excelled academically, consistently ranking at the top of his class. His academic excellence earned him a scholarship to study at Stanford University, where he earned a master's degree in materials science and engineering. He later completed an MBA from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, where he was named a Siebel Scholar and a Palmer Scholar. Sundar's journey from a modest background in India to leading one of the world's most powerful companies is nothing short of inspirational. His story is a testament to the power of education, perseverance, and humility. But his journey was just beginning. The road to Silicon Valley. They say the wind feels different when you know it's carrying you far from home. The morning Sundar boarded the plane from Chennai to California. It wasn't just the weather that changed, it was everything. The scent of the earth, the sound of the neighbors sweeping the narrow lanes, even the way his mother held her sari tight around her shoulders. All of it seemed to pause for a moment. And in that breath, the quiet hope of a family who had sacrificed, so much traveled with him. Stanford was not just another university. It was a world that felt impossibly vast, filled with voices that spoke fast and ideas that moved even faster. Sundar found himself walking through halls lined with minds sharper than he'd ever imagined. Students came from places he'd only seen in atlases as a boy. They wore confidence like second skin, spoke in metaphors, debated in lounges, laughed about tech revolutions over coffee he couldn't afford. At first, Sundar struggled to fit in. English wasn't his first language, and though he had studied it, the slang and speed with which his peers spoke often left him nodding politely, unsure if he was agreeing to the right thing. He would sometimes pretend to understand, then retreat quietly to his small dorm room and replay the conversation in his head, trying to decode it line by line. And yet, in these quiet moments of solitude, he began to listen more deeply, to watch more carefully, and to notice the subtle patterns others missed. He had little money. Most days, he would skip meals or live off simple sandwiches. While others went out for dinners or road trips, Sundar spent hours in the computer labs, not because he was trying to outdo anyone, but because it was the only place where the world made sense to him, where lines of code followed logic, not accent or privilege. It was where he could create something with his own hands, something that didn't care where he was from or how much he had in his wallet. There was one professor, Dr. Margaret Lee, who noticed him early on. She was known for being strict and brilliant and rarely smiled, but she saw the spark in Sundar, not just in his academic performance but in how he asked questions. Not to impress, but to truly understand. One evening after class, she stopped him outside her office. "You don't speak much in class," she said, handing him a paper he had submitted. Sundar nodded, unsure where this was going. "But when you do, you make people think. That's rare." It was the first real affirmation he had received in this foreign land, and it stayed with him. He began to grow, not just academically, but as a person, He started to ask more questions, challenge, more assumptions. He became fascinated by how products were made, especially tools that people used every day. He wasn't drawn to flashy tech. Instead, he was curious about simple things, like how people searched for information, how they navigated the internet, how software could make life easier without being loud about it. When he completed his master's, he faced a hard decision. Return to India, where jobs were limited but his family waited with open arms, or stay in the US and pursue the unknown. His father's words came back to him. Sundar, we didn't send you there to come back safe. We sent you to see what you're capable of. He stayed. Soon after, he joined a small startup. The pay wasn't great, but the work was exciting. Every day brought new challenges, and Sundar was finally able to apply his ideas. The long hours reminded him of the computer labs back in Stanford. And yet, as he worked harder, the distance from home began to feel heavier. His mother's voice over a choppy phone call, his father's pride tucked into short letters, his brother's silence that said, "I miss you." It all created an ache he learned to carry without showing. One evening, after a long day at work, Sundar got a call. His father had been hospitalized. It wasn't serious, the voice on the other end assured him, but Sundar heard something else. Something in the quiet pauses between sentences. He stayed up all night, watching the dark ceiling of his apartment, wondering if ambition was worth the cost of being absent. He booked a flight back to India. When he arrived at the hospital, his father smiled and said, "You've lost weight." They both laughed. And in that moment, Sundar realized something important. Success meant nothing if it didn't include the people you loved. After his father recovered, Sundar returned to the US, but something had shifted in him. He no longer wanted success for its own sake. He wanted to build things that helped people, that brought value, that made everyday life a little more thoughtful. It was during this time he heard about a job opening at a company called Google. Back then, Google was still growing, still finding itself. The idea of organizing the world's information sounded simple, but it was anything but. Sundar applied, not expecting much. He didn't have connections, and he wasn't from a famous company. But he had a deep belief that he could make a difference. During his interview, he was asked to give his opinion on Google's homepage. He hesitated. Should he praise it? Should he play safe? Instead, he pointed out something bold. "It's clean, yes," he said, "but it's also not using its space wisely. People visit this page every day. It could offer more." There was silence. Then one of the interviewers smiled. They offered him the job. It was a turning point in his life. He was now part of a team that would go on to shape how billions accessed information. Sundar started with the toolbar team, a small and often overlooked project. But he poured himself into it, studying how people use the internet, why they chose one tool over another. It wasn't glamorous work, but he believed in it. Years later, that same mindset would lead to the creation of Google Chrome, and later, to something even bigger. But all of that was still ahead. For now, Sundar was just a quiet man in a crowded office, carrying a lunchbox from home, remembering the numbers he used to dial on a rotary phone, and working late because he believed the internet should be easier for everyone to use. What he didn't know was that soon, he'd be in a meeting that would test everything he believed about leadership, loyalty, and who gets to be proud of your success. Next came the moment that would haunt him for years, the invitation, the words they said, and the choice he made. They told him not to bring his parents. The email came late in the afternoon. The sun was dipping. Beyond the office windows, casting long shadows across Sundar's desk, which was cluttered with notebooks, half-drunk coffee cups, and printed feedback from usability tests. His team had just finished a long sprint on a new feature for Chrome, and while exhaustion tugged at him, something about the subject line, Leadership Summit, Executive Invites, made him sit up straighter. He clicked it open. The message was simple, a formal invitation to a private high-level retreat in Napa Valley. Only select senior leaders were being asked to attend. Sundar had earned his place. After months of behind-the-scenes effort, his name was finally being recognized. But it wasn't just the invitation that caught his eye. There was a note at the end, subtle but clear. Guests are welcome. Due to the nature of the venue, we kindly ask attendees not to bring family members who may not align with the executive setting. Sundar read the line 3 times. It was worded carefully, professionally, politely. But beneath the corporate polish was a message that stung with unmistakable sharpness. Not all guests were welcome and not all parents belonged. His breath caught in his chest. He closed the laptop slowly and stared at the floor. The noise of the office around him faded. He thought of his mother's hands, worn from years of housework. Her soft voice calling him from the kitchen to finish his homework. He thought of his father hunched over circuit diagrams by candlelight when the electricity cut out, teaching himself by reading thick manuals meant for professionals, just so he could explain things to Sundar with clarity. He thought of the sacrifices when Sundar had received his admission to Stanford. His father had taken out a loan that would weigh heavy on the family for years. Lakshmi had quietly stopped buying new saris. His younger brother never complained when second-hand books replaced shiny new ones. Everyone had chipped away at their own comforts so that Sundar could stand here now, reading a message that said his family might not fit in. For the rest of the evening, Sundar couldn't focus. He went home and sat alone in the dim light of his small apartment. Outside, the city lights twinkled in a soft rhythm. He didn't know whether to feel angry or ashamed. He tried to justify it. Perhaps the space was limited. Perhaps it wasn't personal. But no matter how he turned the words over in his mind, the meaning didn't change. They didn't want people who looked like his parents, who dressed like them, spoke like them, belonged to a different world. Days passed, and Sundar kept the email to himself. He went about his work, attended meetings, helped junior engineers debug problems. He smiled, nodded, and contributed ideas. But something inside him had cracked open. He found himself replaying old memories like a quiet movie. His mother waiting outside his school with a tiffin box in her hands. His father explaining that every wire has purpose, even the smallest one. Their pride when he left for America. Hiding, their tears behind soft smiles. He made a decision. When the day of the retreat arrived, Sundar didn't take a car alone. He picked up his parents from the airport instead. It was their first time visiting him in California. His mother wore a pale blue sari, carefully pleated. She had tied her hair back, neatly as always. His father had insisted on wearing his best white shirt, slightly wrinkled from the suitcase. They looked around the airport with wide eyes, marveling at everything. The escalators, the vending machines, the automatic doors. So many lights. His father whispered, smiling. Do they ever turn them off? Sundar smiled back, and for the first time in weeks, something inside him felt whole again. They drove to Napa Valley together. Sundar told them stories about his work, the different kinds of people at the company, how fast things changed. His parents listened quietly, proud but careful not to interrupt too much. They didn't understand everything, but they understood him. When they arrived at the retreat, heads turned. Other attendees stepped out of sleek black cars with their spouses, polished, confident, dressed in designer clothes. Sundar stepped out with his parents. There was a pause. An executive from another department approached with a tight smile. Hey, Sundar, he said, eyes shifting briefly to his parents. Glad you made it. I wasn't sure. I thought it was just for guests in the executive circle? Sundar looked him in the eye, calm and clear. These are my guests, he said softly, and they've been in my circle since the beginning. The executive smiled, awkward, and stepped back. Sundar guided his parents through the vineyard paths, pointed out the hills, helped them navigate the crowds. Some people stared. Others whispered. A few smiled kindly. Most didn't know how to react. It didn't matter. His mother sat quietly during the first session, sipping orange juice from a small glass, her eyes wide with wonder at the slideshow presentation. His father took notes on a hotel notepad, as if the meeting were a college lecture. During lunch, a younger engineer approached Sundar privately. You brought your parents, he said with quiet awe. I wanted to do that too, but I thought it wasn't allowed. Sundar nodded. Sometimes, he said, You have to remind the world who helped you build your wings. News spread fast. Whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into admiration. By the end of the retreat, Sundar's simple act had stirred something deeper. On Monday morning, someone posted a photo of him at the retreat, standing between his parents, smiling, unapologetically proud. The image spread like wildfire across internal message boards, then across the internet. The headline followed soon after. They told him not to bring his parents. Sundar Pichai's reply went viral. The story resonated with millions, children of immigrants, first-generation scholars, people who had risen step by step, carrying the weight of silent sacrifices. Sundar didn't post about it. He didn't tweet. He didn't give interviews. He didn't need to. He had said everything in that one simple act. But inside Google, the tides were beginning to turn. Not everyone celebrated. Some questioned his defiance. Others began to see him as more than just a product thinker. A few started to worry. His rise was no longer quiet, and power, in tech and in life, does not like to be disturbed. He had done something beautiful, and now they were watching. They began closing doors. Success has a sound. Sometimes it's applause. Sometimes it's silence after a bold move. But often it's the creaking of quiet doors beginning to close behind you. Sundar didn't notice it at first. The days after the retreat felt warm, almost euphoric. His parents stayed with him for a week. He took them to see the Golden Gate Bridge, the local Indian grocery store, even the Stanford campus where his journey had begun. His mother cried quietly on the steps of the library. "You read here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sundar only nodded, but when they flew back to Chennai, something began to shift at work. Subtle things, calendar invites that no longer came, meetings where his name was left off the brainstorming notes. Projects he had quietly led for months were now being restructured. People still smiled, but the smiles were thinner. Some conversations would quiet when he walked by. And more than once he heard the words, too visible, echo in rooms he wasn't supposed to be in. One evening, he bumped into a colleague from another department, Maya, a sharp, quiet woman known for spotting patterns others missed. "They're testing you," she said in a low voice. Not officially, but that retreat thing made waves. Not everyone's happy about it. Sundar blinked, surprised. "Why? I didn't do anything wrong." Maya smiled, a little sad. "You didn't. But you reminded them of something they don't want to look at." He went home that night and sat in the dark. In the beginning, he had believed that merit was everything, that ideas won, that hard work and good intentions were enough. But now he was beginning to understand something deeper. Power, once threatened, doesn't always fight directly. Sometimes it retreats into systems, into policies, into unwritten rules. They didn't fire him. They didn't demote him. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they started giving him less information, less influence, less room. A key project he had been leading, a new user interface for search tools, was suddenly given to another team. When he asked why, the explanation was vague. Just a shift in strategic focus. He watched from the sidelines as the project slowly unraveled without his input. When users complained, he said nothing. He had already learned that pointing out a mistake would be seen as bitter, not helpful. He focused on his own work. Small things. Unglamorous fixes. Making Chrome run a few milliseconds faster. Understanding how users in rural India accessed the web. He didn't chase visibility. He chased value, and in those quiet hours late at night he remembered his father's voice again. Do what is right, not what is loud. Then came the real test. One day, his manager called him in for a one-on-one. "Sundar," he said carefully, "there's a new position opening up. Senior VP of User Products. Big role. It's between you and another candidate. You've done great work, obviously, but..." He paused. "But?" Sundar asked. "But some folks on the board are concerned about your public image, the viral story, the attention." "I didn't ask for the attention." "I know. But still, It made waves. Some people feel it shifted the company's focus, made things personal. Sundar sat in silence. He could hear the hum of the ceiling light, the distant sound of someone laughing in the hallway. He nodded slowly. So if I stay quiet, I get the job. If I speak with pride, I lose it? His manager didn't answer. He didn't need to. The meeting ended. Weeks passed. The role was given to the other candidate. Sundar congratulated her sincerely. She had worked hard, and he didn't believe in bitterness. But he also knew this wasn't about merit. It was about fear. He had reminded the company of something uncomfortable, that humility could be powerful, that a son could be proud of his parents, that success didn't have to come with shame or assimilation. And that kind of truth unsettled people who built their confidence on exclusion. Still, Sundar kept going. He poured himself into his team, mentored younger engineers, helped design systems to make the internet more accessible in countries with slow connections. He didn't chase headlines, but the world kept watching him anyway. And then came an unexpected call. From a woman he hadn't spoken to in years, Dr. Margaret Lai, the professor from Stanford. "I've been watching," she said, her voice crisp, unchanging. "You're building more than software now." Sundar laughed gently. "I don't know. I'm just trying to stay useful." "Good. Stay useful, but don't stop speaking." She told him something else then, something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Quiet doesn't mean invisible. Some of the loudest echoes come from actions no one expected. That night, Sundar walked through his neighborhood alone. It was cold, and the wind tugged at his sleeves. He passed by tall buildings, expensive restaurants, parked Teslas, but his mind was far away, in a small two-room flat in Chennai, where a mother folded his school uniform with care and a father stayed up late drawing circuits in pencil because he couldn't afford the ink. He knew who he was. He knew who he owed. And he wasn't done. The doors may have closed, but he was already looking for another way in. And deep inside, the idea for something bold had started to form. Not just another product. Not just a faster browser or a sleeker app, but a future where dignity wasn't optional and where no one would have to ask permission to be proud of where they came from. What Sundar didn't know yet, what no one could know, was that within the year, a new opportunity would emerge. One that would put him on the global stage, and the same people who tried to dim his light would soon need his fire. The call from the top. Sometimes change arrives without a knock. It doesn't come with warning signs or dramatic music. It comes quietly, through a phone call in the middle of an ordinary morning, when you're sipping lukewarm tea, halfway through reviewing bug reports, and wondering if the silence around you is a sign to move on or dig in. For Sundar, that moment came on a Tuesday. His phone buzzed once. Unknown number. He almost let it ring out, but something made him answer. "Sundar, this is Larry." It was Larry Page, co-founder of Google. "Do you have a moment?" Sundar stood up from his desk, suddenly alert. "Of course," he said, masking the tremble in his voice. What followed wasn't a long conversation. Larry was known for getting to the point. He spoke softly, without build-up, as if discussing the weather or asking about lunch. But what he said hit Sundar with the weight of 100 silent battles. "We're making some changes. Eric is stepping down as CEO of Alphabet. I want you to lead Google." Sundar didn't speak for a moment. His eyes stared blankly at the floor, but his mind raced back, past the missed meetings, the side comments, the passed-over promotions, back to the moment his parents had been asked not to come, and now the company that once doubted his presence was handing him the keys. "You've been building from the inside," Larry said, sensing the pause. "We need that now." Sundar asked only one question, not about salary, not about power. "Why me?" Larry was quiet for a second, then with a half-laugh said, "Because you never made it about you, and somehow you still became the center." After the call ended, Sundar sat down slowly. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt still, like the air before a storm. That evening, he went for a walk, He passed the same bakery he visited when money was tight, where he used to buy 1 cup of tea and sit for hours, reading articles on a second-hand laptop. He passed the bench where he once sat alone after learning he'd been overlooked for a promotion, wondering if he had misunderstood the rules of the game. He looked at his reflection in a dark shop window. Same eyes, same posture. But everything else had changed. Back in his apartment, he called home. His mother answered. She always did on the first ring. "How are you, Kana?" she asked, her voice like warm water on cold hands. "Amma," he said softly. "I have something to tell you." When he said the words, there was no reaction at first, just quiet breathing. Then she whispered, "They made you the head?" "Yes." A pause. "Does that mean we can come visit again?" He laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in days. "This time, you'll sit in the front row," he said, "next to me." News of his promotion spread quickly. Within hours, the headlines exploded. From Chennai to CEO, Sundar Pichai to lead Google. Humble, brilliant, and unexpected. Pichai steps up. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. The same executives who once questioned his visibility now praised his humility. Reporters dug up old photos. Sundar at Chrome's first demo. Sundar at an engineering conference in Japan. Sundar walking with his parents through Napa Valley. But, behind the applause, another current was rising. There were whispers. He's too soft-spoken. He doesn't have the edge. He doesn't play politics. Within weeks of becoming CEO, Sundar faced challenges that went far beyond software. The company was in transition. Internal tensions were rising. Discussions around data ethics, user privacy, artificial intelligence, and misinformation. He walked into rooms filled with sharp minds and sharper egos, people who expected him to either dominate or disappear. He did neither. Instead, Sundar listened. In meetings where others interrupted, he waited. In debates where emotions ran high, he asked questions that disarmed. He carried a notebook, not to impress but to understand. And over time, he began to shift the rhythm of the company, one conversation at a time. He made it clear. Google wouldn't just build faster tech. It would build responsibly. But not everyone liked this pace. Investors grew impatient. Board members murmured about growth, risk, disruption. Some saw his restraint as weakness. Others saw it as strategy. But Sundar wasn't playing their game. He was building a different kind of legacy. One morning, he walked into a meeting that had been called urgently. Something about a public backlash over data collection. Legal teams, public relations, and senior engineers were already inside. The air tense with blame. A VP stood up, red-faced. "We need to defend ourselves. Users don't understand how this works. The media twisted it. This isn't our fault." Sundar raised his hand gently. "It may not be our fault," he said, "but it is our responsibility." Silence. If people don't understand what we build, that's not their failure. It's ours. Those words traveled. Inside the company. Outside. They echoed in employee town halls and global tech forums. Slowly, Sundar began to be seen not just as a CEO, but as something rarer in Silicon Valley. A leader who understood both code and conscience. But the bigger he rose, the more pressure grew. There were nights he couldn't sleep. Not because of failure, but because of choices. Every product had consequences. Every decision rippled outward. And he knew the weight of those ripples could fall on a young girl with a phone in Nigeria, or a farmer using the internet for the first time in Punjab. He carried all of them with him. And still, he never forgot the weight of silence. One day, at a global summit in New York, Sundar was asked a question on stage. The moderator, a well-known journalist, smiled as she leaned in. "How do you handle being underestimated?" The audience laughed, expecting a light answer. But Sundar paused. "I remember the day someone asked me not to bring my parents," he said. The laughter stopped. "I brought them anyway. Not out of defiance, but out of gratitude. And because if a space isn't big enough to include them, then it isn't as powerful as it thinks it is." He looked out into the sea of faces. Leadership, isn't about taking the stage. It's about making sure no one has to ask if they're allowed to be there. The applause was quiet at first, then it grew. And somewhere in a small house in Chennai, a father with graying hair replayed the video over and over, pride shining through his tired eyes. But the journey wasn't over, because even at the top, Sundar was about to face his most personal test, something no amount of power could protect him from, a call that would break him open, a decision that would ask, what matters most when everything else is at stake? The voice on the line, the call came just before sunrise. The sky was still bruised with the last traces of night, and Sundar was alone in his apartment, standing by the window with a half-drunk cup of tea, watching the city come alive in slow, golden silence. The phone buzzed once, then again. He glanced at it, expecting an early meeting reminder, maybe a time zone mix-up from a colleague in Singapore. But when he saw the name, the world tilted. It was his cousin from Chennai. His fingers trembled before he answered. Sundarana, it's Appa. 2 words. Soft. Cracked. Final. His father was gone. For a moment there was no breath, no sound. Only the hum of life continuing outside. A car passing, a bird chirping, someone jogging. The absurdity of the ordinary surrounded him while inside. Everything fell away. He did not speak. He couldn't. His cousin waited, gently filling the silence. It happened last night. He went peacefully, in his sleep. Amma is okay. She's not saying much. She just keeps looking at the chair where he used to sit. Sundar closed his eyes. The world blurred. He did not cry. Not at first. Instead, memories came flooding in. His father cross-legged on the floor, soldering wires with a look of quiet focus. His father, walking him to school in worn-out sandals, holding his hand like a promise. His father, standing in the airport years ago, trying to hold back tears as he said goodbye. His father, watching Sundar's first speech on a grainy television screen, his chest rising with silent pride. The man who had taught him the beauty of building. The man who had taught him that even the smallest wire had purpose. And now he was gone. In the hours that followed, Sundar moved like a ghost. His assistant canceled meetings. His team sent messages of support. Larry and Sergey called. Heads of global corporations reached out. But none of it felt real. Titles, messages, emails. They all dissolved in the face of the simple truth. He was a son without a father now. He flew back to India within hours. When he arrived at the house in Chennai, nothing had changed, and everything had. The same narrow lane. The same neighbors peeking out from behind doors. The same faint smell of spices and rain-dampened earth. Inside, his mother sat by the window, her hands still. She didn't rush to him. She didn't wail. She simply looked up and said, "You're here." And that was enough. They sat together in silence. Later, Sundar walked through the house, touching the edges of the life that built him. The bookshelf with old manuals. The faded photograph of his graduation. The plastic chair his father loved. Its arm cracked from years of use. In the corner, he found a box. Inside were neatly folded papers. Sundar's first report card, the letter, from Stanford, a cutout of the newspaper article about his CEO appointment. And beneath them, a note in his father's handwriting. Every wire has a purpose. Some just take longer to light. He broke then. Tears came in waves, silent and uncontrollable, falling from the corners of his eyes like ink on old paper, not just for the loss, but for all the words they had never said. All the moments too ordinary to be noticed back then, now shining with sacred clarity. He stayed for the rituals, for the prayers, for his mother. People came, neighbors, relatives, even strangers. Many had never used a computer, but they came not for the CEO. They came for the boy who used to live down the street. The boy whose father always said, "He will go far, you'll see." One evening after the final ceremony, Sundar stepped outside. The sky above Chennai was a patchwork of stars, and the air was heavy with incense and memory. An old family friend, stood beside him. He was proud of you, the man said quietly, but not because of your title. He was proud because you never forgot us. Sundar nodded, his throat tight. I tried, he whispered. The man smiled. You did more than try. Back in California, life resumed. The meetings returned. The headlines faded. The pressure rebuilt. But Sundar was different now. Grief had sharpened him. It had peeled away the last layers of performance, the last need to prove. He no longer moved to be accepted. He moved because he believed. He began to lead differently. He asked harder questions, listened with deeper patience, refused shortcuts even when pushed. He launched new initiatives focused on digital access in underserved regions, invested in tools for education in rural communities, spoke publicly about technology not as profit but as responsibility. He pushed for internal reform, diversity not as a checkbox but as a foundation. And quietly in the background, he started something new, a scholarship fund in his father's name for students in India who had the talent but not the means. No press, no announcements, just a letter sent to each recipient, written by Sundar himself. You are the wire, you are the light. Never let anyone tell you your place in the world. Years passed. His mother eventually came to stay with him in California. She still made tea the same way, still folded his clothes when he wasn't looking. And sometimes in the evening, she would sit by the window, watching the lights of the city, whispering to the empty space beside her. You'd be proud of him, she would say. And in that stillness, Sundar found his peace. He had built systems that served billions. He had stood in rooms where no one thought he belonged. He had answered questions with silence and changed the shape of power with grace. But in the end, the most powerful thing he ever did was to never forget the hands that raised him. And when they tried to make him choose between pride and presence, between progress and memory, he brought his parents anyway. The end. But not really, because this story doesn't end with a title or a company. It ends with the quiet echo of a lesson passed down in a small home in Chennai, that every person, no matter how high they rise, stands not alone, but on the shoulders of love.